I'm Alec Baldwin. I'm a resident of Amagansett. My wife Hilaria and I have 4 kids. But please welcome Kevin McAllister from Defend H20.
Thank you, Alec. I'm very honored that you're here this evening. I'm honored that everyone's here on this sultry evening. And certainly on behalf of Defend H20, we have an important topic. And, you know, largely I believe with climate change, and in particular sea level rise, for many it's an abstract concept. The glaciers are melting. Well, what does that mean locally? And as a scientist that really has expertise in coastal zone management, I see the subtle changes, and I really project forward in the next 30, 50 years, and I think there's a sense of urgency if we don't start to tune in on the implications of sea level rise and climate change and really start to take actions, regulations, policies, even just adhering to policies and regs that are already on the books. And unfortunately, from a state level right down to a local level, we're losing our way. And as a result of it, you know, our shorelines are in peril, both for public use. I mean, these are, we're defined as Long Islanders about our beaches and bays. You know, water quality, as Alec was talking about, you know, perilous decline over the last 20 years or so. Again, with the shorelines, what they mean for our lifestyle, whether or not we like to fish, spiritual use, just walking the beaches, feeling good about life, and seeing the changes over time that on the backside, you know, ultimately the property owners were slowly but surely starting to fortify the coast, and that will leave us without natural shorelines. So again, public use will be lost. The habitat values. So there's a great deal of issues that we really need to become more aware of and involve ourselves in solutions.
You know, I want to begin just in a prefatory way by asking him a couple questions. And you know, one thing that always occurs to me when I'm involved in issues like this is it doesn't matter out here, Democrat, Republican, none of that in terms of the political landscape really matters. Everybody cares. Everybody cares deeply about what we have here and the diversity we have, and woods and beaches and farm fields and everything you can imagine in the water. Everybody cares deeply about what's happening, and the problem is that to deal with much of what we want to deal with, it's very expensive. You know, I was speaking about the political realities. I was with a group of people who years ago we went to Albany to lobby Mario Cuomo when he was governor for the Environmental Bond Act in New York, I think in 1988, which was going to mirror the Big Green initiative that they had in California, where you're going to have a big blob of money, some of which would be used for construction, you know, brick and mortar construction of water filtration, and the rest of it for passive uses like land acquisition. And we were in Cuomo's office, and Cuomo Sr. said to us, will you tell those people on Long Island to just go sell another polo pony and they can pay for it themselves? And there was this attitude about this area that this, you remember my friends and I, we gasped. You know, we left there and we said, this was a Democratic governor who we thought maybe we had a chance with. But that idea that out here everybody's viewed as just wealthy, privileged people, stewardship of natural resources is viewed as something that's second to having a good time and having a party out here in the summertime. And we realized that you know, we're kind of on our own, you know, in terms of what we're going to be able to make happen. But what I wanted to ask you just quickly, I got a couple quick initial questions, which is where did you grow up and how did this evolve in your life in terms of your concern about these, you know, your career? How did you end up where you are now?
I was blessed to grow up in a community, Center Moriches, on the South Shore. Beautiful bay, Moriches Inlet right across the way. It's the eastern end of Fire Island, so it was all undeveloped land. We went across by sunfish, sailboats, little runabouts. Ultimately, you know, the ability in a child of the 70s where, you know, you were turnkey. You just went out the door. And my parents knew I was across the bay, a mile and a half, Great Gun Beach. pitching a tent, eating clams, bluefish, whatever, and after about a week or so, you come back tired, hungry, you recharge, you do it all over again. So I'm steeped in the great outdoors. From here, I moved to South Florida for 15 plus years. I was educated in marine biology and coastal zone management, and my expertise in shoreline management was really with Palm Beach County. I did the biology around shore protection projects, everything from pumping sand on the beaches, restoring dunes, artificial reefs. I've done it all with respect to the biological review. And, you know, I'm here and I'm blessed really to call my work my life.
Now, in the time that you've been here, you've been living out here for how long now? You came up here from Florida?
Back in Florida, 20 years.
So over 20 years. So in that time, what are some of the changes, I mean, with your unique eye, your trained eye about what to look for in terms of the effects of any kind of climate change or erosion or whatever, or rising sea levels or temperatures? What's some of the things you've seen over the last 20 years that alarm you?
The bays are expanding, so they're trying to define their own limits. We are slowly, incrementally, and over the last 20 years, we have seen more home site development. There's more homes, let's face it. And building our homes and our lawns, we are pinching off wetlands. So I've seen wetlands that are unable to migrate landward, so we are losing tidal marshes, which is incredibly important for water filtration and habitat values. I see a lot of locations that different forms of seawalls have come in, whether it be stones or vertical bulkheads, where these shorelines are no longer walkable because you have sea level rise coming up, being pinched off. So there's subtle incremental changes, but over the course of decades, they're monumental.
Now, if you, and this is a kind of a fanciful question, but if you, in the range of whatever, 4, 6, a dozen points that you're of concern you have, if you could snap your fingers tomorrow and make one of them change, if you could affect one critical change in any public policy now that relates to this issue, and something reasonable, not that you could, send half the people back to New York who live here, but anyway, I'm getting a nod from some of the politicians here in the House. They know the real secret is to put a toll up a Shinnecock. But anyway, I live in the city too, but I'm like, oh God almighty. What would be the one, if you could throw the switch, what would you change first?
I think waterfront properties, in particular with our antiquated wastewater management, our cesspools, our septic systems. As sea level rise is coming up, what's called coastal inundation, so think of a salt wedge coming subterranean, actually raising the water table where now our wastewater systems are immersed in groundwater. So, the bugs are free swimming, polluting our water. So I think on the front row, we've got to start to really implement alternative wastewater.
But they have, haven't they?
Yes, slowly but surely.
But describe some of the change. For those who don't know about, what's the name of the system they want to bury in the yards now with everybody, the treatment systems?
Collectively it's called innovative alternative septic systems.
Right, and describe what that does.
What's important is with wastewater, because of the high nitrogen content and its integration into the receiving waters, we're triggering these algal blooms. We've all seen the ponds, Georgica, the list goes on, all our embayments turn brown, green, red, every color of the spectrum. Some of them are highly toxic, where they're lethal to wildlife, dogs, etc. We really have to start to get these the nitrogen levels lowered. These systems effectively treat that in that way. We're starting to now use drain fields instead of a 8-foot pit in the ground, which is in the water table, to disperse that wastewater closer to the surface so it's not interacting with groundwater, and then you have a form of filtration moving through the soils. So this pretty basic innovation that until recently we've been dragging our feet on implementing.
I was told, and I love the opportunity to talk with people like you to, present the facts and examine the facts as they are. I don't know if it's in East Hampton Town or where are they ordered that homes, and you can describe what the criteria is, homes over a certain size or homes over a certain value or whatever it is, they have to put that system in, the new system in, starting when?
Oh, that's in place now.
So that's active
yes,
now.
And East Hampton as well as Southampton. So if you have failing systems, where, again, these older, archaic, in-the-ground pits, if they need to be replaced, then we need to strive and implement these alternative systems.
So that's not the law now, that someone refurbishing an existing old system has to use the new system. But new construction, you have to use the new system.
Yes.
So in new construction, what's the criteria? Over a certain value of home or a certain square footage of home? Who has to put that in? If I'm building a 1,200 square foot cottage somewhere, I don't have to put some big device in the ground, do it? Or does everybody have to do it?
It's not a large device. I mean, the treatment systems are size of a vault, for the denitrification. The criteria, again.
Who's that?
Everybody.
Okay. Every home has to have it, right? And so in the new construction thing, so I'm imagining the size of the system varies with the size of the house.
Yes.
If you've got a small house, it's the size of the trunk of a car. I'm just riffing this. And if you've got a big mansion, you've got one the size of a few cars.
And the systems are modular where you could stack them.
You can stack them.
So if you get
and what happens when everything again, I just do these as a primer for people who don't know. You flush the toilet, you take a shower, everything goes into the system, and what happens? What does the system do?
Essentially, it's converting the nitrogen to a different form, so it gases off. It's bugs eating bugs and creating a situation or conditions that are favorable for bugs, good bugs.
There's no infrared light treatment, there's nothing like that?
No, there's no bells and whistles. It's really simple recirculation to ensure that the biological processes are happening.
Right. In the time that I've lived out here, some people who I don't know and some people that I knew quite well have done, I'll have you interpret this phrase for me. When I read in your talking points you sent me, they've done a lot of coastal armoring of their property.
Yes.
They built a lot of, one guy once described to me a system that he said that they had in France where these giant devices were made of metal. They looked like jacks you used to play with as a kid. They were these spiky-looking structures that looked like some contemporary art you'd have on your front lawn. And they'd pile those on the beach, and they would help to build revetment there, correct?
Correct. The shoreline hardening is a general term
for
seawalls. So vertical bulkheads, sloping stone revetments, large sandbags. There's a photo to our right here. That's North Topsail, North Carolina. I call that being swallowed whole. But you can see the properties are wrapping themselves in these sandbags, essentially. The other photo is downtown Montauk, taken in April after the last nor'easter we had, where the sandbag revetment is exposed. The common denominator, you are fixing the shoreline, you're interacting with wave energy, reflecting wave energy, limiting the ability for that shoreline to move, and inevitably something has to give. And what gives is that dry beach. So our ability to walk the beach, to have recreational space, again, habitat for shorebirds, horseshoe crabs, the list goes on, marine turtles if you're down in Florida. But incrementally, these are coming in at an alarming rate. And I'm very concerned that in 25 years' time or longer, we will effectively rim the shorelines with some form of walls, including the pickup, the jacks that you're describing, that all impose the same impacts. And then we will see water quality implications, we will see wildlife implications, and back to Long Island lifestyle, our ability to walk beaches and say this is part of who we are, will be lost. And no one's the wiser, no one's to blame, we're all to blame, but we have to arrest this trend soon. Otherwise, again, we're going to lose the resource.
Is there an area out here now, I'm not assuming there is one, but is there an area out here now where you see erosion on a level that you find of concern to you?
Certainly in the bays. I mean, we're close here. Noyak Bay, for instance, has been armored. The walls, as I described, have been coming in the last 10, 20 years. I know my good friend Sumner said, you know, you cannot walk a shoreline near his neighborhood any longer. You know, on the ocean side, of course, many of us oppose the Sandbag Revetment that was installed in downtown Montauk. And I know it's a very difficult concept to grasp, but where feasible, and not all locations are, but where we have the ability to move back, we've got to move back to allow our shorelines, our beaches to breathe. So again, the values that they provide are intact. So
a couple points you raised. One is, so is it safe to say that you are supportive or you are tolerant of this kind of revetment, this kind of whatever the device is, but only on an as-needed basis? If that guy, in other words, if someone's house is going to go into the water, should that person have the right to try to save their house from going into the water?
Yes.
Okay, but where we don't know that that's necessary, if it's an essential, we have to let the beaches expand and contract at their own rate, at their own rhythm, and not try to control and manage it for personal real estate development.
I like to use this benchmark. Over the last 40 years, we've seen roughly a 4-inch rise, an inch a decade. Over the next 40, and this is solid science that comes from the think tanks, the science wonks, highly vetted, we're looking at 16 to 30 inches of sea level rise in the next 40 years. So that ramp up is going to be pronounced. Where we have properties, and I see many homeowners that are installing structures because they don't want to lose real estate. The homes aren't in peril. In some cases, they have the ability to move back and pull back. And I think certainly when in locations that you know, the homes are not in peril for the next 30 or 40 years, you know, let's not jump the gun on the response. And, you know, where there's opportunities with beach replenishment where we can pump sand, and I believe that's not a long-term sustainable prospect, but in the interim basis, you know, let's be more thoughtful, and to the extent we can, let's keep the walls off the coast.
Now, when you talk about, it sounds like what you're saying is that pumping sand, you view that as a short-term solution. A necessary one, perhaps, but,
yes.
but no better than a short-term solution. And in the material you sent me, you talk about dredging and moving sand and applying sand as being a very costly process. Why is it so costly? I believe in the documentation you sent me, it costs $15 to $20 million to dredge enough sand to cover 1 mile of beach.
Yeah, in some cases, yes.
Why? Why is it so expensive?
This is true for both the West Coast and East Coast. When you consider the physical, the dredges that can do this type of work, it's limited. There's only a handful of companies. One is the Great Lakes Dredging Company. These are, you know, small ships. I mean, they're machines that have the ability to put down a suction dredge, you know, emulsify a great deal of volume, pump it via pipeline and pump it onto the beach. You know, and then you have heavy equipment moving that sand. You know, it could take weeks on end. So the mobilization and the cost is incredible. For the Mid-Atlantic region, the average lifespan of a renourished beach is on the order of 3 to 4 to 5 years. And then we have to do it again. And in many cases, and I've really have called this out because I know this from my experience in Florida, we have to be sure that the source offshore is beach compatible, that it's the same grain size that will stick around.
And if it isn't, what happens?
If it's fine, then it disappears under one storm, or what they call scarps, where it shears off vertically, where it's a recreational hazard. Marine turtles cannot nest. The beach will unravel very quickly. And as I described, the limited number of companies, if you consider up and down the East Coast, every community is faced with the same issue. And we're all calling on those 3 or 4 companies. You got to dredge our beach. permits, cost. You got to come back in 4 years. Well, we can't come back because we're down in Delaware, we're down in North Carolina. And I think over time it'll become untenable just to keep pace with the rising sea level that will exponentially
There won't be enough
increase.
of this to go around. Maybe that's a business we should get into. The beach-compatible sand emulsification business.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask you another question about this, but you mentioned about this this dredging thing. A lot of people, you know, right or wrong, they always think that when we have these and have had these catastrophic weather-related events in particular, they're not just limited to that, but that, you know, the cavalry in some people's minds, or or a group that exacerbates the problem in other people's minds, is the Army Corps of Engineers. We always view them as somebody that's going to step in and do these big jobs that only they can do, that are going to help protect us from some encroachment. How would you describe their history in this area, and how would you evaluate what they're planning to do? Do they have a plan for out here now?
They do. It's called FIMP, Fire Island to Montauk Point. It was first hatched back in the 1960s. It's taken decades to come to, I'll say, fruition. Several years ago, Congress funded FIMP on the order of a couple $2 billion. And ultimately, they are drawing up prescriptions for beach management from, again, Fire Island to Montauk Point. So some segments are talking about pumping miles of beach to build out beaches. Some cases trying to restore and build dunes. In rare instances, they're actually talking about locations where they have to retreat. And I have gone to multiple meetings where they presented this to the communities from Babylon to Montauk, and I've challenged them on their theories or their concepts. And a good example, on the South Shore, there's a community, Mastic Beach, which is at sea level. The lawns that they mow are wetland grasses. This location is untenable. And what the Army Corps had prescribed initially was to raise the road that went to the front side facing the bay, raise it and function as a dike. Well, that's well and good with some storm surge, but from water coming up from below, you know, you're talking about homes basically swimming in groundwater, in our own septic waste. And finally, I think there was enough community pushback, and I helped orchestrate this, where they've revisited, and now there's some effort to acquire land to actually withdraw from these more vulnerable areas. And we have to identify those locations. You know, not every location's appropriate for beach nourishment, building walls, but again, let's start to plan, and let's start to acknowledge the implications of sea level rise and get on a stick here.
What do you think is, go ahead.
Okay.
Applause are an important part of this kind of work we do here, so please applaud him at will. You know, one thing, I come out here, and my wife and I and our kids, we live out here in the summer, the entire summer. We're out here for 2.5, sometimes 3 months, and come out here year round, and live out here, not full time. I wish I could, but I've been unable to make a living out here. They don't shoot a lot of game shows out here, but you know, I stay plugged in and connected to what's going on, and of course something that's more current in my mind, it's probably something you've been aware of for a long time, is this modification of the CPF law to be able to do other things with CPF money. Now, for those who want, you know, like I always want from someone like you, a definition, what can you do with CPF money now, and what would you like to see them do with CPF money in the future? Other than straight up land acquisition, what else can they do?
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar, CPF is now roughly 15 years old, I guess. Ultimately, in every real estate transaction, 2% goes into a pool. Initially, it was used for acquisition of farm space, woodlands, open space. As of about 2 years ago, the law was modified whereby 20% of the income could be applied to water quality improvements, addressing stormwater flows, these innovative alternative systems, trying to offset the costs of those to the homeowners. And, of course, land acquisition. And, Alec, you had pointed this out when we were walking up. What's really positive, CPF in the case of, say, East Hampton and I believe Southampton now, we're starting to acquire some waterfront properties that have dwellings on them for the sheer purpose of extinguishing, raising the home, eliminating it, and allowing the bay or the creek to breathe and find its limits. So I think it's been very positive. There's fine-tuning on the application of CPF water. I personally believe that we have to be very strategic and apply it into kind of a community base as opposed to just purely giving away rebates to homeowners where we're, think of a checkerboard, where we're making improvements all across the geography, but rather to be a strategic approach where we know there's a pollution source coming from the Ditch Plains community into Lake Montauk.
Describe Ditch Plains, because that's the one in particular in the groups I've worked with out here. They talk about, and you can spell this out. What I was told was that they want to pick some homes there that are contiguous.
Great point.
And buy those homes and tear those homes down and build a unit that is a treatment unit for that community on these sites, correct?
Yes.
That's one proposal.
Correct.
Well, do you support that idea?
Yes, and in fact, it was your commentary when the law was being considered. You had singled out Ditch Plains, if you recall, I remember, saying that this is maybe a good candidate site to really spend the money. Ditch Plains exists on the south side of Lake Montauk. It fronts the ocean, of course, Surfer's Paradise, a great older community. There's a ditch that runs from Lake Montauk southward in through the community that was dug many years ago for drainage. You have clay layer, you have a high water table. Ultimately, it was to make the area conducive to living. But because of that ditch, it's a straight conveyance. So now you have a higher water table. Septic systems are draining into the ditch. That higher bacterial level is moving directly into Lake Montauk, affecting shellfish beds, swimmability. There's discussions, and what you're describing, ultimately to acquire some individual parcels that would lend themselves to a community sewage treatment system. And thereby the game plan would be then to connect hundreds of homes into a centralized treatment system, foregoing the straight flush to Lake Montauk with the ditch. And let me just make this point. While we talk about this stuff, and that's a great idea, the community's got to get behind this, and we've got to push our elected officials to prioritize this and to really have the wherewithal and the support to make this stuff happen.
You think that's not the case now?
There's too much languishing. I find.
Why do you think that is? What are they afraid of?
Here's a bit of a critique. I have said this publicly. I think elected officials think in 2 and 4 year cycles. November 3rd, 5th, 7th, whatever. I think largely they are a bit frozen to make decisions today that are going to benefit 25, 50 years out. Because, this is scary stuff. But when they're equipped with information and the
You're talking about town officials, not village officials, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to clarify that.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure we were kind to all of our guests here.
No, and
the village officials are geniuses, and they're on top of everything.
No, and I don't say that as a criticism per se.
I know. We're going to just have a couple more questions, and then we'll take a couple more comments from Kevin, and then we'll take some questions from the audience before we stop and maybe eat more. I
wanted to reiterate the thought on Ditch Plains as an example. So here's a strategy that makes perfect sense. It will be costly, but ultimately through community support and then the elected officials feeling the love from the community to really pursue this type of treatment for a larger scale community as opposed to one single home.
And what's another area out here you think that can happen? Because I read something in the paperwork you sent me, or the material you sent me online, and this might be unrelated. What's the situation you describe in Lazy Point?
Oh, Lazy Point, if you know, fronts Napeague. Lazy Point, again, does not have elevation. So again, coastal inundation is a factor. So we're seeing the water perch up from below. The homes are on traditional septic systems. That's another community that we've got to be talking about, either withdrawing and pulling out of, or at a minimum start to incorporate innovative treatment where we get these systems out of the groundwater, because we are polluting our bays by virtue of that interaction with surface waters.
Now, if I'm doubling back here, then forgive me, but there was what is sunny day flooding?
Sunny day flooding, I did not coin this phrase. This came from Miami.
Sounds like the name of a band, actually, but go ahead.
Sunny day flooding relates to the lunar cycles. So on full moons and new moons, which really drive the tides, over the last several decades, with sea level rise coming up, on say a full moon, a community would experience floodwater not associated with a storm event. Sunny day flooding occurs all the time. Dune Road in East Quogue area. There's other locations, and we've seen it around the neighborhoods. I mean, you drive around your neighborhoods, and there's the puddle that exists. I mean, I have photographs of locations that there hadn't been a drop of rain in 10 days, and yet 4, 5, 6 inches of water during one of these lunar cycles, and that's the coastal inundation, the evidence. And over the long term, what's
another straw, that comes into the equation.
And in the case of Southampton with Dune Road, they raised it. They claimed 6 inches. It was closer to 3 or 4, at the cost of $1 million. Maybe a couple of less sunny day flooding events. But is that going to? What's the situation in 5 or 10 years' time? Are we going to spend another $2 million to raise the road? And I subscribe to acknowledgement that some locations are just untenable for the long term, particularly if you consider at this static moment in time, we have the ability to acquire some land and to really actively withdraw from these locations, and not to go the other way where we're investing millions of dollars in infrastructure to perpetuate living in a location that is going to be a polluter and inaccessible because of sea level rise.
I just have a couple more comments. One thing is, obviously, and I don't say this to be glib, we live in a small town. It's a small town, and which makes there's a lot of good that goes with that, and there's some challenges that go with that. When my builder is doing work on our house, my wife and I, we renovated our house for a year and a half, did a big renovation on our house because we seemed to be having a kid every 15 minutes for a while there. We had 4 kids in 2 hours, it seemed. And when I said to Brian, our builder, I said, blah, 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 about this permit and how could we get this permit accelerated, he was so funny. He said, well, I'm going to talk to Steve, and it'll be fine. I think it'll work out. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, we went to school together. We went to high school together. It's a small town. Everybody grew up together out here. The local people who really, really live here, this is their year-round home. What is your advice to politicians in a small town who have a tough time saying to people, your house is going to fall in the ocean, or we're going to change the laws and you're going to have to move, or nothing that dire, but we're getting closer and closer to some extreme measures that may need to be taken. 10, 15, 20 years from now, who knows? I have my own crazy, global warming theory, and that is that ice in the poles melts and freezes and melts and freezes like a governor for the temperature in the atmosphere, and the water goes into the ocean, and the ocean water determines a lot of temperature, climate, and which is why opponents of global warming will say there'll be tons of snow, this winter. And they'll go, see, global warming, huh? Oh, you're such a genius. But you realize that that's why we still have an active system that has that ice flow. And when all that ice is gone, and there's nothing to regulate the temperature, then they go, oh, hell is going to break loose. But my point is, what do you say to local officials to give them some, I don't want to say steel, but to give them some encouragement to face some of these problems, knowing there's going to be some tough choices they have to make. They're going to cost people the value of their real estate. Some things we've taken without any judgment, without having any judgment of what people's desires are and so forth, but things that we have been used to. There's a way we've been used to living out here. You're going to buy a house, and 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you sell that house. It's going to be worth a lot more money than when you bought it. And all these things that we've taken for granted that we may see starting to change. What encouragement then do you offer them to face the tough choices?
I think it's incumbent that our elected officials do their part to educate themselves. And I would really redirect that question to the public. And it's participation. It's public participation. And I'm so honored by everyone turning out tonight. Perhaps you're a little smarter by virtue of our exchange. I draw on you and ask you, please continue to impart your position, your feelings on our elected officials. Give them strength to have that courage to make those decisions that are visionary, that are, a decision at a town board level that is really thinking about 25 years out or greater. And that it comes to really to people power. And that's up to us to participate. What's the old saying? Tune in, turn on, and participate. So,
I always think that the thing is that there's some changes we can make in the next 25 years that will be very, very, some of them will be very tough changes to swallow. There will be changes that we'll make that will be not easy, but if we don't make those changes, we're going to be making some changes that you never imagined. We always joke when you read about global warming, and we'd say it's going to be beachfront property on Bluff Road. And then 20 years after that, it's going to be beachfront property on 27 Highway. And the wars are going to come up and up and up. It's going to take a long time. Most of us will be gone by then, maybe. But again, as a man who's remarried, I've got 4 children. This idea of, I know that everyone has that sense of stewardship, that we have to do this to pass this on to other people. What we've enjoyed. I was out on my boat today and had the nicest day with my friend, with Mike Sincu's son, Nick. We drove my boat around, and we had a beautiful day. My kids are in the pool. It's paradise out here. This is heaven. It's heaven. And we got to go back to New York and go to work in September. I don't want to go back to New York and go back to work. Can't you host a game show and make some money so I can stay out here? You'll teach all the yoga in the world. But that idea that I know everyone here, they care deeply. And what I want to close my portion of this before we take some quick questions is that, we all have to consider putting our money on a horse. It can be in electoral politics as a candidate you believe in, you believe gives you hope, you believe that person is, man or woman, is strong and smart and mature, and they're courageous, and they're going to take a stand, they're going to protect the greatest number of people, they're going to serve their community. Make tough decisions and so forth. And then there's not-for-profit organizations like Defend H20 and people like Kevin McAllister who need your support. They need your support.
Thank you.
And whatever you can do to support organizations, if you give them $20, $50, $100, that's what really, really matters. Because I just want to say I'm a great, great admirer of this man, of this organization.
I cannot understate that public participation is so important. And, as much as Alec said, identified Defend H20, of course, we need your support. But please recognize that my day in and day out job, I show up at these hearings to speak for greater protection. And if our elected officials recognize that I am, in fact, empowered by public support, that, of course, strengthens my voice and ability to then sway decision makers in favor of greater protection.
We're going to close. I just want to say 2 things. One is that You know, I live in New York a lot of the time and work in New York, and when you're living in New York right now, a hot topic is the subway and the MTA and what a mess the subway has become again. And I've lived long enough where it's a cycle. The subway was a mess in the 80s, and then they put a lot of money into it, and the subway was great, and they got all the graffiti off of it, and the trains were running great, and the subway was really applauded. It was really going really, really well. And now we're back again to where the subway is hell, and it doesn't run, and there's this tragedy of inefficiency and so forth. But that's something that when you look at it in New York, you realize that's essential. Because someone would make jokes about me, and they'd say, well, when was the last time you took the subway? I said, that doesn't matter. People that I care about take the subway. People that I depend on take the subway. It doesn't need to affect me personally in order for me to care. I'm a New Yorker in that sense, that I want everybody to do well, and I want everybody to have what they need. And if doormen, cleaning ladies, my accountant, it doesn't matter, anybody is coming into the greater New York area on an MTA transport system, then I want them to have the right experience. And out here, the same thing is true. We don't have a subway out here, but what we have is this environmental legacy that we must protect. If this goes down, what else do we have here? You've got some farming, but I don't think you really have an agricultural economy out here. Some people work in agriculture, some, and I don't diminish that. That's important, but that's not really what it's about. You have a hell of a real estate industry out here, and those people have got some good jobs going. That's important. You know, where you can make fun of real estate brokers until you want to sell your house for the most money you want to get, then you love one. It's like cops. You know, you're kind of 50-50 till you need one. You know what I mean? And then you love cops. This idea of out here, the protection of this environmental legacy of ours is job one. It's who we are. And I want to say that we have to support this guy in every way we can. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to Kevin McAllister. Thank you.